Hey everybody, welcome back. I just want to give a little disclaimer, a little forewarning. If you have a weak stomach, you might want to skip this video altogether, or if you are about to eat, or if you've just eaten, you also might want to put this video off until later. This is definitely not for people with weak stomachs or got food in your system. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the slaughtering process because I really don't care to talk about that much. I didn't see it. Went during the off hours, and it was more or less about my experience going to the slaughterhouse, not seeing the actual slaughtering process. Now, this was in my second semester of culinary school. We went to the slaughterhouse for a field trip. Yeah, the first semester we learned which is called Food Production 1. We learned like a lot of the basics, like cutting, like the knife skills, and basic fundamentals of cooking, like vegetables, soups, and sauces, seasonings, things like that. And then the second semester, which is called Food Production 2, we got into the proteins, like the meats and the fish. Now, this particular slaughterhouse, it was a small town, a small drive-through town, and the guy that owned it, he had a butcher shop, which was on like the main drag through town, and then like a few blocks away down the street, kind of off the beaten path, he had an actual slaughterhouse there. And we went at nighttime when the slaughtering wasn't going on. Thankfully, I didn't want to see that. Just hearing about it kind of turned my stomach a little bit. The day class, I don't know if they gave, I'm pretty sure they gave people the option of not watching it if they didn't want to. But the day class, they actually had to go there during the slaughtering. I'm kind of thankful I took the night class. I wouldn't want to see that. And just hearing about it, just the smell was enough to turn my stomach, like I already mentioned. And it was really, really weird. The guy that owned the slaughterhouse, I had a dream, I think about 4 years earlier, and I wasn't old enough to drive yet. I was about a year away from driving. I'd never been behind the wheel in my life. But I had a dream that I was driving along, and it was the road that this butcher shop was on looked very similar to this road in my dream. I mean, there's been times where I've had like dreams, and obviously there's that saying, dreams can come true. Hopefully, it's not a nightmare, but this was actually like a nightmare that came close to like being true. I do remember in this dream, like driving down this road, which I wasn't even able to drive yet. I was still like a year away from driving, and driving along, and all of a sudden I see this like guy behind me that looks just like this owner, almost exactly like this owner, this guy that owned this butcher shop slaughterhouse. And I was about a year away from seeing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I hadn't even seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre yet. I probably would have been even more freaked out, but once I saw the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I'm like, oh man, this is really kind of relatable in a way. But yeah, I know you really shouldn't judge a book by its cover. You can't really judge people by the way they look. But this guy, just like this guy that was in my dream, was trying to kidnap me, driving behind me. And I forget what happened, if I came to a red light, and I remember I woke up pretty quickly. I think he came out of his car and was like trying to attack me, or trying to take me away, what have you. I don't know. I try not to remember my bad dreams too much. But I saw this guy, I'm like, oh my God, he looks almost exactly like that guy. And the road that his butcher shop was on looked almost exactly like the road in my dream. So anyways, this was after dinner. This was like in the evening. This class, I think, went from like 6 to 9 or something like that. But it was like a real small town. So we go into the butcher shop first. And it was funny, there was like, I'm not sure about now, but back then there was like 7 grades of beef. Prime was the highest, and then there's choice, which is still pretty good, select, commercial, utility, cutter, and canner. Now, cutter and canner, it's pretty much like cat food, like dog food. Fucking disgusting. And this guy was talking to us about like the different kinds of meats he had in his butcher shop first, before we went to the slaughterhouse. And I think he picked on me, and he said like, okay, young man, if you're gonna make chili, he's like, which would you rather use? Would you rather use this? And he pointed to ground chuck. I'm like, oh yeah, I was thinking before I said anything, I'm like, yeah, I'd definitely use that. Or would you use this? And he showed me this really nasty, disgusting meat in a can. It looked like cat food or dog food. And I said, oh, I'm going with that ground chuck. I'm like, he's like, why? And I just explained to him, obviously it's more expensive, but I'd rather pay more for good quality meat than to eat, dog food. totally disgusted me. He acted like so, I don't know if he was playing with me, but he just acted like like he thought that was so foolish to spend all that money on that better quality meat for chili. He said something to me like, "Oh, you can. I know what it is, and you know what it is." But he said the average person, if you put it in their chili, they probably wouldn't know, it was such a lower quality meat. If you put a good seasoning in there and slow cooked it for hours. I'm like, sorry, like I'm going with the ground chuck. Or if anything, I'll use really low quality ground beef. But I said not that kind of crap. This guy was like it was a white guy, kind of like I said, you can't really judge a book by its cover. You shouldn't, and looks could be deceiving. But this guy like totally had like that child molester stereotype. Like 40 years, 35, 40 years old, white guy, kind of had the Jeffrey Dahmer look a little bit, glasses, he had a goatee, and the way he didn't really show much emotion, he just looked like a really, really creepy guy. He acted creepy too. And turned out this guy was like I don't know if he realized, it seemed like he didn't really realize it, but he was a total racist from what I could see, because we had, and it was mostly adults in this class. I was actually surprised. I was like waiting for somebody to put him in his place, to call him out on it. I was just a 19-year-old kid at the time. But there were there were about 20 people in this class, and there were probably about 4 or 5, 6 Hispanic people, and there were 2 black men. And first he made a comment, like, what does this have to do with anything that we're here to learn about? But he said something about, he was kind of trying to it seemed like he was trying to push some buttons, but he said something like, oh, in the Chicago area, he said the Illinois state, there's only 2 black certified meat cutters or butchers or something like that. And then he was talking to the 2 black guys, said, yeah, you guys would be very proud. And a lot of us are kind of like, what the fuck? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, what the fuck is your problem? And then when we went into, I'll get into it later, we went into the slaughterhouse later, but we went into the slaughterhouse. I mean, I've worked with white people that didn't wash their hands, didn't shower enough, didn't practice good hygiene. It has nothing to do with race, really. Especially, a lot of foreigners from Europe that don't shower regularly, don't use deodorant. But he made a comment about Hispanics. He goes, yeah, I got, quite a few Hispanic people that work for me. It's like, how many Hispanic people do you got working for you? And how often are they going to the bathroom? It's like, you telling me? How do you get anything done? Like, are you telling me you go every time an Hispanic person goes to the bathroom in your workplace, you're going outside the bathroom door? But he said, yeah, I have quite a few Hispanic people to work for me. And he's like, I put my ear up against that door. And he's like, I wait until the toilet flushes. And then he admitted that he listens to make sure that the sink is running, to make sure they're washing their hands. And there were quite a few, 5 or 6 Hispanic people in our class too. And we're kind of thinking what the fuck? What does race have to do with hand washing? There's plenty of people of all races, I'm sure, that don't practice good hygiene. I've seen it happen time and time again. And he asked somebody else, I don't know, what they were. Most of us were going to school to be chefs. We wanted to be chefs when we graduated. I don't know if he just got pissed. Maybe he thought this guy was just going into the business for the money. But he was asking all of us, oh, what are you gonna do when you graduate? And this one guy is like, ja-jing, ja-jing. And I don't know if he got pissed off about that. He's like, don't count on that or something like that. He's like, it's not easy making money these days. And again, as we were kind of thinking, what kind of a smart-ass comment is that to make to somebody that's going, that's the main reason people go to college to learn, but also to make a better living. People that go to college usually make a better living than people that don't go. That's the reason I went to culinary school, rather than just learning on the job and to gain more experience too. I think I had trouble sleeping that night when, after all was said and done with. Luckily, you didn't get to see any of the slaughtering, but he described it to us. The guy described it, and just hearing about it is, oh man, and just the smell in there. It smelled like piss, and some people describe it as warm blood, but yeah, I kind of smelled the smell like piss and blood. And he did say that they had 2 doors, there was one side where the cows came in, and they come into this cage, and same thing with the pigs. And he did, they got to know something's up. They got to know something's wrong. And I think a lot of animals, when they get stressed, they release stress hormones. that probably causes a funky smell with their blood and their urine. But yeah, he said, well, yeah, a lot of them would come in, they'd piss, they'd fart, they'd shit themselves. Really, just hearing about that, like, oh God, that's enough. Like, I don't need to hear any more. Yeah, we're talking about the slaughtering process, which I'm not going to talk about that. It really kind of did turn my stomach. I think I had trouble sleeping that night. And I don't know about my class, but I know the day class, there were a couple girls that, and I don't know if we saw the slaughtering process, but they did, a couple of them, at least temporarily, did end up becoming vegetarians. I worked with a guy once that, I guess he went to a chicken slaughtering plant, and he said, made him never want to eat chicken again. I know one day he was cutting up a chicken breast for a chicken salad, and I didn't know about it at the time. And he's like, oh man, I don't know how, I thought he was just talking about meat in general. He's like, oh, it's making me cringe just having to cut this chicken up. He's like, I don't know how anybody can eat this stuff. He's like, I haven't had chicken for 10 years. And I'm like, are you a vegetarian? He says, oh, no, I'm not a vegetarian. I just don't eat chicken. I said, how come? And he said, oh, when I was in culinary school, I went to a chicken slaughtering plant. And he said, it made me never want to eat chicken again. I'm like, oh, okay, I won't ask. I probably don't want to know. Maybe I won't want to eat chicken again either. And there was a smokehouse there where I'd be making stuff like, smoked pork belly, ham, bacon, things like that. I was actually kind of glad. I think we went in there after the slaughterhouse. I'm like, thank God we went in there, because I imagine I probably would have come home. And Mom, I think I came home, she was like, smelled like bacon. I had it was in the wintertime, I had like a leather jacket on. And that leather jacket did smell like bacon, but I'm glad that we did that, because before going to that smokehouse, I probably would come home smell like piss and blood. And I definitely want to recommend, there were actually a lot of homes around there. I did hear a story once about a couple that they were really disappointed. They had trouble selling. They bought a house in the wintertime, and they didn't realize there was a slaughterhouse nearby. And then all of a sudden in the summertime, they found out about it, and the smell got pretty rancid. I do remember I didn't know about it because of a kid, but I do remember for years on the highway, the town where I grew up, or next town over, every time, like on the highway for like a mile, there was just like a really like nasty smell. Really, it smelled kind of like burning rubber. Now looking back on it, probably was the piss and the blood from the animals, but at the time it kind of smelled like kind of like rotten fish or burning rubber. That kind of smell, very nasty. And I ended up finding out years later that there was a meat packing plant over. I think they did the slaughtering. It was kind of like the same thing. I think they had the slaughterhouse. And then they had a butcher shop. I think my mom used to go over there. It was a meat packing company. She used to go over there and buy meat. And it wasn't so bad in the wintertime. But yeah, the summertime, you could definitely smell it. But yeah, I definitely recommend, if you go to buy home or even rent, make sure that before that you're aware of what's around there, whether, kind of smells, whether it be like a landfill, a slaughterhouse, maybe even a gas station, a fast food, or any kind of restaurant that, if the smell of the food might bother you. That sort of sewage treatment plant, that's a big one too. Town I grew up in, there was like a sewage treatment plant, a lot of homes over there. Again, like not bad in the wintertime, but the summertime, oh man, the smell was terrible. I mean, it can't be healthy to be breathing that. It's gotta be bad for your respiratory system. I wouldn't be able to stand it. I would have to move, and imagine you have a hard time selling in an area like that. So yeah, I definitely recommend knowing what's around you before you buy, because if you do, you may not like it, and then you might have trouble selling it. And I think if you're going to sell, you probably want to be honest. You want to be dishonest in that respect. So, but again, getting back to this guy, oh man, so more creepiness. He was going to show us. He had a cold room, and they store the whole beef carcasses. So he opens up the meat locker, and he pulls out this beef carcass that's on a meat hook. I'm not even sure if he's supposed to. I was really surprised, really shocked that he did it. I probably would have gotten another one out. Probably would have tossed it out. I'm not so sure. I mean, it's not like it had the feathers on it. It was the actual meat. The fat was exposed. And, some cuts of meat, like prime rib, are served, where the fat's on the outside, it's served that way. The fat isn't cut off. That's how you get the tenderness, the flavor. So he opens up the meat locker and he pulls a beef carcass out, and the carcass falls off the hook, and he just picks it up, puts it right back on. I'm like, oh boy, like I'm definitely never buying meat from you. Well, quite ways out of the way anyway. It was like 45 minutes away from where I live. But yeah, I'm never buying meat from your fucking place. And he takes like this butcher knife, this what's called like a bony knife, almost looks like a machete. It's got a real long, thin, curved blade. And I think I was standing right next to him, or pretty close. And he says, okay, stand back. I need everybody to stand back. And he grips the knife and he like stands probably about, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet in front of the carcass. And he like lunges at it. He goes, bam, stabs the carcass and then pulls down like that. And he was like going to show us like some of the cuts. And then he starts opening it up. And I think he showed us like all these different cuts he could show. He shows where like the beef ribs are. He's like, oh yeah, these are the beef ribs. He's like, this is where, he was talking like all these different cuts. And then I think it was because filet mignon is one of the, the most expensive cuts, beef tenderloin. And he didn't mention what the name of the cut was. And he's like, in here, he's like, over here, you got big money. So I imagine that's what it was. So I found that really disturbing in a way. And then our instructor was kind of a little bit of a creepy guy himself. He talked about eating, like, he won't sound like one of my friends said that he sounded kind of like a nature survival guy. He talked about eating all these weird things like donkey and grasshoppers, rodents, lizards, snakes, things like that. I think I laughed at him when he said he ate donkey once, and he's like, well, don't laugh. I'm like, I am going to laugh. Like, I find that crazy. Like, I couldn't do that. That's, unbelievable. And somebody would eat donkey, because that's just not the American way. He was German. Maybe that's a German thing. I don't know. And, but then he had mentioned the guy that owned the place. I think he had, even though it was 6 to 9 o'clock at night, he said that he could bring like a couple of his guys in to maybe slaughter a pig or a cow, one of the two. And our instructor was kind of weird. He was like joking around, like he's like, oh yeah, I'd love to. I think before we went there, he was kind of hoping we get to see the slaughtering process. He's like, yeah, I want to see. I think he knew that we weren't. I think from finding out, he talked about us going to a slaughterhouse. And I think at first he thought that because some slaughterhouses actually do the slaughtering on the second, like a lot of them are first and second shift. I guess this place was just primarily first shift. And I think before he found out about that, he said something like, yeah, he was serious too. He's like, I want to see a cow get slaughtered and have its cold blood splatter all over our faces. We're like, what the fuck? Like, man, I don't want to see that. So the guy, even though our class was at night, he had said that he could bring like a couple of his workers in and they could slaughter a pig or a cow or both of them or one of the two. And we could go and see it. And I think he caught on that a lot of us really didn't care to see it, our instructor. And, you could kind of tell he didn't want to say no. He's like, because he offered to bring us back. And he's like, I'll have to talk to my guys about that, And we were joking about it in the car on the way back. Like, yeah, you could tell even, Chef so-and-so didn't want to tell him no. But yeah, that's really, I heard that one slaughterhouse I'd mentioned that wasn't too far from where I grew up. They are big. It's really low. I would not want to do that at all, but especially, at first I thought maybe they got paid pretty good money because it's such a nasty job, and it takes a lot you gotta be like a different person to do that, but those jobs like don't pay shit. It's like a minimum, maybe the guy that owns the place makes a lot, but that's like a minimum wage or near minimum wage job. And I hear that they work those people like dogs because, and I think they, that's the way they get away with paying low is they'll hire people with criminal records too, because the last jail I worked at back in Illinois, one of the inmates that was in that jail I talked to, and he had, I think he had just gotten out. He needed just his TB test. He had already been out, but he just needed proof of his TB test results, and so that he could get a job there. And he'd already gotten a TB test and passed it. And he had talked about it. And he said it was going to be like, I said, oh yeah, congratulations, I'm so glad that you got a job. He's like, yeah, he's like, it's not going to be really fun. I don't really want to do it, but at least it'll be a job. You know, I can't find a job anywhere else. But he was talking about how nasty. I guess he had some friends that worked there, but he said it was going to be really nasty because of all the blood spatter, things like that. They pretty much wear like raincoats or jackets that, you know, the blood runs off. It doesn't stay on them. But he said that sometimes like they don't get like he said like the second shift. I think he was going to be on second shift. But he said the day shift people, they got fresh coats. But he said sometimes they didn't have enough clean ones. Boots too. He said sometimes for the second shift they didn't have enough clean raincoats or boots left over. So sometimes like they'd have to be wearing a raincoat or boots that already were soaked in blood. I'm like, oh God, that's so fucking disgusting. The smell gets worse as the day goes on. I'm walking in a pool of blood and oh yeah, I don't know how anybody, I'm not really religious, but still I could not do that for a living. You really got to be a different kind of person, I think, to do that. And yeah, this guy definitely seemed like a different kind of person, like that movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like this guy, it's actually funny, like this town, I wonder if there was any relation, but this town that this butcher shop, Slaughterhouse, was in, there was actually a hotel, like 20 years ago, too, around the same time, pretty close to the same time, but the owner, I guess, was also a chef, and he butchered his own meats too. And he ended up being put into he was in the jail for a while, but he ended up getting put into a mental institution. I forget how many it was. It may have only been a few people, but still, he had murdered some of his hotel guests, and there were rumors going around too. Their bodies are cut up. And he had a restaurant there. There were some rumors going around that he might have used his victims to serve meat, whatever, in his restaurants. And I wouldn't be surprised. I guess during the investigation, they could tell the way that the bodies were cut up that it had to be done by a butcher or a chef, somebody that knew what they were doing, because the bodies were like disconnected at the joints. They said whoever was cutting through the joints definitely knew what they were doing. This wasn't just some hack job. But yeah, that was actually the same town, and it gets me wondering if there was any relation, any kind of connection there. But like I said, he kind of had like that typical child molester, that Jeffrey Dahmer kind of vibe from him. And yeah, definitely, like if he had invited me back, if this guy had like invited me over to his house for a meal, probably would have declined. Probably would have been like walking into the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, that cannibalistic family that are killing their victims, and they had like a barbecue joint. They're butchering their victims and then serving barbecue to their customers at their gas station. So yeah, I think I will end it there. I hope I gave you enough information. I hope I didn't keep it. It wasn't too vague. I hope I kept you interested, but yet at the same time, I hope I wasn't too vague. But at the same time, I hope I didn't gross anybody out. That was not my intention. I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about and kind of a funny story. So that's all I have to say for now. I will see you next time. Please comment, like, share, subscribe. I'll see you all real soon with another interesting video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night, everybody. Take care. Bye.